Okay, so the first question is, what is the difference between authorization and authentication? So can somebody of you think about it? What do you think is the difference? Any ideas? Okay, so yeah. Okay, so now authorization is our privilege to access certain resources. Okay, so let's say if I have 5 pieces of paper in front of me, okay, maybe I'm just authorized to use one of them. Okay, authentication is verifying that something or someone is who they say they are. Okay, so let's say I go to the library and I authenticate myself, so I show my ID so they see who I am, and then they know what I'm authorized to access, which books. Okay, so they authenticate, so they verify I'm who I say I am, and then based on my authorization that I verified this, now I'm able to access different resources from the library. It's exactly the same with computers and networks. Okay, so just to sum up, authentication is verifying that something or someone is who they say they are. So how we can do that? There are 3 main ways with which we can verify this. Okay, and this is knowledge based, which means usernames, passwords, or for example giving some tasks or exercises that just this user knows. Then property based, so these are for example ID cards, access tokens, and so on. Okay, and finally this is on something that we are, and this type of authentication came in more recently. So this is the biometric authentication, meaning fingerprints, facial recognition, and so on. Okay, and if we dig into a little bit more details, you can obviously see there are 2 major types that are password based and multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication is obviously when we combine either of those 3 categories that I just mentioned, if we combine them together. Okay, or sometimes we can combine a few methods from the same category. Okay, so yes, as I said, we can very easily combine 2 factors, which will make the authentication way more secure. Okay, so for example, each of those methods that I just mentioned, they have their own weaknesses. For example, the knowledge-based authentication, obviously there you can forget your password, or you can forget the answers to your secret question. In the authentication based on ownership, you can obviously lose the item that you possess, right? So in that situation, you will not be able to be authenticated. Also, the knowledge-based authentication can be duplicated, so somebody can find out your password. The biometric authentication is a little bit more difficult to replicate, but there we have the problem on refusing authentication to somebody falsely, right? So we need to have systems that are very precisely, that they read the fingerprint, the facial recognition. Obviously, if you have a twin, the facial recognition is not going to work that good, for you. But these are just small individual cases. In general, the biometric authentication is the most secure one these days. But still, if you, for example, combine authentication by knowledge, a password, and authentication by ownership, for example, sending a push notification to somebody's phone, okay, that could be pretty effective. And actually, we can see that these days this is one of the most used authentication when we're using the different applications we use. Okay, and here you can just see a few benefits and disadvantages of the multi-factor authentication. So obviously on this figure right here, you can see different levels. So the weakest way of authentication is just using rule 1, which is a password, okay? And then as we move downward, we can enhance more and more our security, okay? Obviously when we use method 1, 2, and 3, which is the knowledge, the ownership and biometrics based authentication, this would be the most secure way to assess a system, okay? And here I put some of the disadvantages, of course. So the more factors we add, the highest chance we have for falsely rejecting access to a user on a system that he actually should have access to, okay? Okay, and here very briefly you can see the different ways that two-factor authentication is implemented. So you can have hardware tokens, which are normally these days just ID cards that companies give to employees. The push notifications, for example, Google has an application called Authenticator, which is going to send you a push notification, and you can either approve or deny, accept, decline access, right? We have the SMS verification with the verification code, okay? And also there is voice-based authentication, but this one is not that commonly used these days, but this is pretty much sending you a voice message with a specific code that you need to implement. Okay, so when we want to be authorized, or when we build a system to authorize users through certain application, there are three main components. So the first one is the input. Okay, this is what the user inputs, let's say in the password field. The second element is the transportation system. Okay, so this is the medium that transports user's password. Okay, and finally is the verifier, or the system that verifies whether the information that the user inputted is correct or incorrect. Okay. For the transport portion of the system, of course, there we can face the most problems. But for the transport portion, we're specifying some protocols for this information to be transported. As we already mentioned, for example, we're using the HTTP protocol when we're doing and when we're implementing passwords, over the web. Okay, and here I put down just the different types of authentications, the examples, and also their vulnerabilities. So of course, once you look at this presentation again, you can have them there, just in front of you, structured in a nice way. Okay, we already went over those. Okay, so finally, I just want to discuss briefly about the non-repudiatable authentication, or if you remember from the previous lecture we talked about this. This is a type of the authentication where we want to verify that the user for sure takes ownership for what they did, okay, or for the actions that they did in certain application, okay. And for this reason we're having undeniable signatures, okay, which is a digital signature scheme, okay, that will allow our user not to be able to deny his actions, his or her actions on certain system. Okay. Okay, so finally we're going to talk about the different types of passwords that they are. Okay, you can see they're reusable, one-time passwords, passwords challenge response, and combined, which is combination of all three. Okay, so in reusable passwords, there are really two types of passwords over there. So we can use the reusable passwords for user authentication, okay, and for client authentication. Okay, this is a password that normally persists. It's the same all the time, or you might be asked to change it, you know, once in every 6 months, something like this. Okay, so the interesting thing here is what's the difference between user and client authentication. Okay, so the user authentication is pretty much the password that the user inputs to the field, and then you authenticate that the user is who they say they are. Okay, now in the web based authentication, there is also client authentication, or the user that logs in from his account. Okay, what particular system resource this client is able to use. Okay, so the server checks not just if the user is that they're who they say they are, okay, but they also check if the client has the privilege to use the specific resources that the server provides. Okay, so the user authorization is simply verifying who you are. The client authentication is not only verifying who you are, but also what resources you're also able to use. Okay, so now the one-time passwords have also very interesting mechanism. Okay, and those are the S-key passwords and the token based. So the token passwords are pretty simple. They are just we can call them hardware passwords. Okay, and they're based on certain piece of hardware that you have with you, whether it's going to be a card or a flash drive or another piece of hardware that you have with you. Now the S-key passwords are one-time passwords that are normally generated with a MD4 or MD5 encryption algorithms. Okay, so normally if you imagine a client-server model, okay, for example, the client, you know, initiates the communication with the server, so it initiates also the S-key exchange. Okay, so normally the client sends the first packet to the server. Okay, the server responds with acknowledgement of this packet, and it sends back the response. Okay, so the server and the client, so let's say the server generates this S-key password, then with this key the client generates a code that sends it back to the client. Okay, and once the client receives server response, the client also uses the S-key to decode the response from the client. Okay, so they're both using the S-key to create and then decode the password, and we're going to see this in one of the next lectures. Okay.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Just about the client for the reusable password.
Mm-hmm.
Would an example of that be like you're using SSH and you have an account with the site, but then they want you to connect maybe via SSH, but your machine does not yet have the RSA key inside the system? I guess I think of a specific example with GitHub. Sometimes if you via SSH, but I'm on a different machine, even though it's my account, it says this machine cannot connect.
Yeah, so connecting through SSH would work exactly in the same way, right? So this function is a very low level function. Okay, so this is done so once you send your password through internet, nobody can access it, right? So we're using normally MD4 or MD5, you know, this is encryption function. So based on some code, we're creating some ciphertext from the password, so you can read the text but you cannot see the password. And the server, you know, will also have exactly the same key, so it will be able to decode what you send to them, so only they will be able to read the password. if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah, and actually sometimes this also applies for not only when you write a password, but also, for example, let's say if you logged in to your Google account and you want to access a third-party authentication, you would even not be able to type any password. So let's say the server of the third-party authentication is going to talk with the Google server, and it will ask them, okay, is this user authenticated? Send me a token. Then this token is going to be encrypted, okay, sent to the other server, right, that you want to be authorized for. Then there it will be decrypted, and this will happen in the background as well. Okay, so you pretty much have the second situation is very common these days, and that's done, so you don't need to type your username and password over and over again. Okay, yeah, so finally we're going to discuss of course, very popular protocol which is used for accessing web pages, and this is obviously the SSL protocol. Okay, so we're using this protocol for public key authentication. Okay, so let's say if you want to access a resource over the web, okay, the user firstly initializes the connection with the server using the SSL protocol. Okay, then we perform a handshake between the client and the server. So handshake means we're sending a request, server acknowledges, server responds to us, we acknowledge it. Okay, so we're doing a handshake that we're both accessible. Okay, so then if the handshake is successful, so we're both up and running, then the server is going to verify that the user is having the appropriate privileges, to use the resources on this specific server. And here on the figure, you can really see how this works. Okay, so firstly, we're exchanging cryptographic information between the client and the server. Okay, and once we exchange our secret keys, so normally, the client and the server, each they have a secret key, and also there is a public key that they both use as well. So public key is accessible to everyone. So once they exchange the secret and they also have the public key, then they can speak to each other. The client is going to use the secret and the public key, his own secret key and the public key, to send information to the server, and the server is going to do exactly this, but on the other side. And this is how they will be able to exchange information. Okay, and this is exactly what we discussed, the MD5 mechanism. So I just outlined here some steps done when we're using the MD5 algorithm. Okay, so firstly, MD5 is used for encryption, and for this reason we can also use it for authentication, to transmit passwords. Okay, so the process is, the user creates an input key, and then the server verifies it. So in the MD5 algorithm, the encryption is called a hash. Okay, so a hash function, this is some mathematical algorithm through which your password passes, and then from this you're creating the hash, but this is really an encrypted message. Okay, and if some part of this message is removed, the whole message is no longer readable. So there is no chance that you get a message with missing part of it and not notice that some information is missing. This is the most important part. Okay, you will always know with MD5 that the message has been modified, no matter what. Okay, so there is no way for us, for an intruder, to change the message, okay, and then the message gets to the receiver because of this mathematical function. So I will also show you how to use MD5. It's very simple in Python, and it's not going to be today, but maybe during the next lecture. And also you're going to use MD5, I'm pretty sure, or maybe another similar algorithm to this one for your assignment. Okay, All right, so far we're talking about authorization and how important it is, but are there situations where we don't really want the users um, to to get authorized or get some specific privileges? Yeah, there are situations like this. For example, sometimes what we just want to do is to review the resources of a server. We don't really want to edit them, we don't really want to modify them, we don't want to delete any resources, we just want to view them. And of course, some companies, they would like the users not to have some specific or to pass some specific authorization protocols to view their resources. Why? Because that way their resources will be more easily accessible to the public. Okay, so for this reason, there are anonymous authentication protocols that allow clients to access servers without any specific, usernames or passwords. An example of this is how we are accessing the websites these days, right? To access the website, you don't necessarily need username and password, but you can see the page, which is piece of information. Okay, so that is the theoretical part for today, guys. So before continuing, are there any questions for authorization or authentication? Okay, so based on this and on the assignment today, you're going to have quiz 1. As you can see, it is not very difficult for a start. Okay, it's just important, to understand the different terms, the different type of authentication. I mean, some of those things are, I would say, quite basic, and you can even relate them to your everyday usage of your laptop and the application that you use every day. Okay, but now we're going to jump into a little bit more details, because now we're going to write a simple code that will create an authorization system. Okay, now to do the next exercise, we're going to focus on how we can build a very simple login and register system. This is really one of the main parts needed for you to understand a very simple authentication mechanism. Okay, so what we're going to do today is using a very simple database, implementing this using Python. So we have a function with which we're going to register a user, we're gonna put those users in a database, and then we're going to give the users the opportunity to log in to their username. Obviously, if their username is not in the list, we're going to reject them. I will try to keep the code as easy as possible for you to understand, because the main outcome from this code execution will be for you to understand the whole technology on how registering and logging is implemented in today's systems. Okay, so you can go to programiz.com/Python programming online compiler, and here you can pretty much write any Python code without the need to install anything on your device. You can do it completely online. Also, I'm not going to import any libraries, so your code is going to be able to work pretty much everywhere. The first thing I will do here, and I will get a little bit closer so you can see, is to create a dictionary. So I'll create a dictionary called users. Okay, and this will be an empty dictionary. So here we're going to put our users once they log into our new application. The next thing I will create is a function called register. Okay, and obviously here we're going to prompt the users when they want to register to our app. Okay, so firstly I'll write here print and then register. Okay, so once we go to this function, the users see this keyword register, and they know that now they need to put their username or password, for example, for the registration. Also in Python, you can write functions like this. So this will be a function, which means that the code inside is going to be used later on in our main function that is going to run the app or the script. Okay, so now we print register, and then I'll create two variables that we're going to take from the user. The first one will be username, okay, and this will be an input variable, so input, okay, and here I write enter username. Okay, so here the users will be able to write username. After that, I'll create another field called password. Okay, and here the users should be able to write their password. Okay, so I'll write enter password. Okay, so if you're not familiar too much with Python, don't worry. This input keyword right here means that we will display this message, enter username or enter password. Then the users will be able to type their username and password respectively. And once they click enter, the variable username will take the text that the users type for username, and the password will take the text that the users type for password. Okay, so once we're done with that, now the next step would be what? So now once we register the users, we want to put their names into the dictionary, right? Into the users. So let's do that. I'll write users, okay, username equals to password. Why do I do that? So when you have Python dictionary, if you want to add a new element which dictionary takes key and value pairs, you can specify it like this. So at the key username, we will have the password. Okay, so let's say if I want to register and I put my name Martin and the password 123, and I run through this function right here on line 8, I'm going to assess the users and I will enter this. So the username will be Martin and the password would be 12345, for example. Okay, so if I enter username Martin and password 12345, in this line here I will create a username Martin as a key, and then the password will be as a value right here. Okay, finally let's just print a message to the user. So for example, registration completed. Okay, and once you're done with that, we're ready with the register function. Now let's jump to the next function, which will be the login function. So let's do def login. Okay, and here we're going to do something similar. Okay, but this time we'll need to verify that the username and password that the user puts into this function is verifiable from the database, which is our users dictionary. Okay, let me actually remove my name from there. So firstly, I'll actually copy those 3 lines right here and I'll modify them just a little bit. So I'll write here login, okay, and then bear in mind that this username here is not the same as the one in the other function. The username and the password are local to the functions, okay? So those here are valid only within the login function, okay? So don't mix them. Now, let's move on and now query our database, okay? So I write if username, so if the username that the user put right here is in users, okay, so what we're doing here is we're checking if the username that the user put here is inside our dictionary, okay, and we also want to verify the password, right? So and users at position user name. Okay, so now we're gonna get the value of the key username, which will be the password, and if this is equal to password, okay, then we're going to say that the login is successful. So I'll print, okay, login successful. Okay, so why we do those in this order right here in the if statement? So in Python, and this is true actually for most of the programming languages, when you do an if statement, the operations, especially when you use AND, are checked from left to right, meaning that firstly we're gonna check if the username that we put is in our dictionary. If it is not, we're not going to move forward, okay, because this condition is already broken. We're not going to move to the next part, okay? So if this is true actually, then we're going to move to the next part and we're going to check if also the passwords are matching. Why am I putting the username check first? Well, obviously because if we don't have a username, there is no point to check the password for that username. And most importantly, if the username is not in our dictionary, if I write username right here, okay, I'll get an error since the username that the user added is not in the dictionary, so we cannot search for the value or the password of that username. So firstly, I'm verifying that the username exists, and then I'm verifying that the password for this username is correct. Okay, so once we're done with that, I will just write here else, okay, because we need to send a message to the users if their username or password are not correct. In that case, I would just print invalid username or password, okay, so they know that they were not able to log in. Normally in the real world applications, once you verify the username and password, here you give access to the users to certain files or systems, you know, that this username and password gives privileges to, okay? But for the sake of this exercise, we are just printing that the login was successful, okay? So this is our login function. Now, we're almost done. Now what's left to be done is to create our main function, or the function from which the users will be able to either register, login, or exit the app. So the idea is to give those three options to the users, and let's say if they select one, they're going to login. If they select two, they're going to register, and so on. So here is how this is done in Python. So I'll create a new function here. I'll do def main, and this will be our main function for the app. And firstly, I want our app to always be displayable to the users. So whether they register or login, I want the app to loop, so to always display the options to the users. To do this, I'll create a while loop. So I'll do while true, okay, and here when I do while true, this will mean that the code inside this while loop is going to continue over and over again until we see the break keyword, okay, which we're going to see the break keyword once we select the exit option, for example. Okay, so if you don't understand what I'm talking about, I'm gonna show it to you right now. So let's do print, okay, and here I will add the options. Okay, so here is how it is going to look. Now we're going to have, this means a new line, by the way. So 1, register, option 2 will be login, option 3 will be exit. Okay, this is just a print, so now we need to implement those options. So here I'll create a variable called choices. Okay, choices, and this will be equal to input. Okay, and here I will do enter your choice. Okay, so once I do that, I will do if choice equals to 1. Okay, then I want to do what? I want to register the user, right? So I want to run the register function. Okay, so if the user selects 1, then we're going to jump to the register function and we're going to register the user. Okay, now if the user selects option 2, and I will just copy and paste this line, so this will be elif. Okay, so we're adding another option right here. So elif, the choice is equal to 2. This means we want to log in the user. So we want to run the login function right here, and the user will be able to log in. And then I'll add another option. So I will do elif. Okay, and we want to specify what would happen. So if the choice is equal to 3, which means exit. Okay, so as I said, if we select exit, we want to exit this while loop here, or to exit our application, so we stop repeating all the options. And we can do that with the break keyword. This would break the while true and will exit of our application. Okay, let's also print a message, so I will do print. Let's print goodbye. And we're all set. So I will just add else if the user selects anything else. So we cover also this portion of the inputs, and I will do print. Okay, and here I write invalid choice. Please try again. Okay, perfect. So now once we have this function created, now let's make sure that we run this function once we run the file. Okay, so in Python, to do that, you can write if, actually let me move a little bit up. So if we do if main, if actually name equals main. Okay, what we want to do, we want to run the main function. Okay, so what's happening here and how the code is going to run. Now the starting point will be right here at line 35. So when we run this file, we're gonna go to line 35, okay, and then we're gonna go to the main function. Okay, we're gonna enter the while loop, we're gonna print the options to the users, and then the user will be able to enter 1, 2, or 3. And depending on what they enter, they will either go to the register, login, or exit the application. Okay, so let's run it and let's see if I did some typos or mistakes, or if the code is going to be running properly. So let's run it, and you can see that now here we have all the options we need, just like how we specified here. So once we have that, let's select one of the options. So I will select, for example, register. Okay, and you can see that here we got an error because choice is not defined. So maybe I misspelled it, right? So here I wrote choices, but here I'm looking for choice. So I'll fix that mistake and I'll run the code again. I will select one register. Okay, and now here we're in the register function. So let's select a username, Martin, and the password 123456, for example. Okay, you can see that the register has been completed. Now let's see if we can log in using these credentials. So I'll select 2. Okay, and let's add our username. So let's do Martin. Okay, and the password 123456. Okay, so the login is successful, meaning that the username and the password is in the database. But now you might tell me, okay, but how do we actually verify that this really works? Maybe we get this message for pretty much everyone that tries to access our system. So let's see, let's try that. Now, if I select again login, okay, and I add the name Alex, with a password 123 and I try to log in, you can see that the username or the password has been wrong. Okay, this means that this username and this password is not in our users dictionary. Okay, so finally you can exit the application by selecting 3. Okay, and you can see that with 3 we exit this while loop and our application is now closed. Okay, so you can jump into the application and see like each and every line of it. In order to get more confidence, you can experiment with the application and tweak some of the code there to try different things. I always advise this, but that would be everything from this lecture. I hope this app was useful for you. If you ask any questions, you can definitely do, and I will assist you in the best way I can. Thank you for meeting with me today, and I will see you next week.